Out of all of my Pokemon Sun and Moon content, I have to say that I've struggled the most with the Legendaries because we don't know anything about them. They were on the screen for like maybe a second of the trailers, if that, and then we also got so much more information about everything else that we got to see the typings of the starters, and we could speculate about how they're going to evolve and what other typings they have just from little hints, but we have nothing when it comes to Solgaleo and Lunala, and whenever I've been trying to make a video about them, I just stumble super hard like, I don't know what typing they could be, but it would be cool if we knew or something like that. So that's what this video is for. We're going to be looking hard into what it could mean and just get a little bit more information about these guys. And let's start off with Solgaleo because he's easiest. Fire something, if not mono fire, but I'm not thinking mono fire. And that's because the sun is a flaming ball of gas that's hot and fiery and fire, so Solgaleo is pretty good right there. But I was also, this is where all the stumbling came in. It's like fire normal. I've seen some people say like fire fairy. I've just seen mono fire. But one thing that's really curious is that psychic typing may actually be an option. All we have to do is look at some of the psychic typing interactions with space. Now, I would have to say that the twins from Moss Deep City, their gym, has a lot of those space aspects to it because they do use Lunatone and Solrock. And Lunatone and Solrock are also very interesting because it seems like they would have some kind of other typing. At least Solrock, it would be like fire psychic, but no, they're both rock and psychic, that they keep to that psychic typing. And one of the biggest things that people have been wondering is like, how are Lunatone and Solrock going to interact with Pokemon Sun and Moon if they interact at all? Either way, psychic typings representing from the space, but we can also look at Olympia. She actually has a really large role in this because she is a psychic chick of immense power, and one of the biggest reasons to that is because of space, or at least the inside of her cloak is a galaxy pattern creating zero gravity that increases psychic power. And that makes a lot of sense, that we can go back and just kind of look at any of that one of the biggest powers of the psychic typing is suspending an opponent. They use that telekinesis, and you make it to where your opponent is very vulnerable by being in some kind of suspended or psychically controlled state. And it looks like the zero gravity might have something to do with that, and that makes a lot of sense when those creepy flying twins are going around and stuff, that's their manipulation of space, and that relates to galaxy space. But one thing that's also really interesting is we look at the visors. Either way, like, it looks like cool space visors when we look at Solgaleo and Lunala, and it's almost an exact pattern of both the box art and Olympia's cloak. So maybe that also has something to do with it. They can channel their psychic powers through space and cause really fun stuff to happen just like that. And it does go back to the cosmic typing, that people have been speculating in cosmic typing for quite some time. And it seems like that if we didn't get it in the 6th generation because of Olympia, we're probably not going to get it now, that there's just been so much other information that, okay, maybe cosmic typing is just that extra branch on the psychic typing. So it's not going to be too much of its own standalone typing, kind of like how sound. Sound isn't its own typing, but there are sound-based moves, and they do interact with other moves. There's the ability Soundproof, and there's also Substitute, that sound moves go through Substitute. So it's like a pseudo-typing, and maybe Cosmic is representative of Psychic with that. And we just look at Solgaleo, that when it charges up its signature move, it gets all super spacey inside the visor. And I guess we can just safely say Solgaleo has a secondary Psychic typing. So, Fire Psychic for Solgaleo, GG, I think we figured that one out. But what does this mean for Lunala? Is it going to have its Psychic? Or are they going to be like Psychic Bros? Because that was the whole argument about space, that it really comes together right there. And when we look at Lunala, it's not as obvious, that we don't think Fire equals Sun like we do Moon equals what? Exactly. Now, the first idea is maybe Dark, that this Pokemon looks wicked. I mean, it has a lot of those like dark inspirations to it. And when you think about it, the moon is out when it's dark normally because dark side and stuff like that. So darkness is associated with night, moon, dark, might make a lot of sense. And when we look at the special attack, that is freaky. And that seems pretty malicious and representative of something dark. You know, it just has a very intense feeling to it. But then things start getting weird because when the attack finishes, it doesn't look dark, it actually looks light. Now this could actually mean something because when we look at Solgaleo's attack, yeah, you can actually see Solgaleo's signature move in the Japanese trailer. Now it's going to be in the teeny tiny little picture and a teeny tiny little video playing through the window of the game shop, and we don't get to see much of it, but one thing we can note is that it's a fire type attack. It's like a massive solar flare of burning fireness, but that means that maybe the signature moves are going to be based off of their primary typing. So how does this affect Lunala? So that means we're looking at Solgaleo. Solgaleo is going to be Fire primary and then Psychic secondary, and it's using its primary attack. But this doesn't look like a Dark attack, so what could it be? Another thought is Fairy. So is Lunala actually going to be a primary Fairy typing by comparison? Because we look at Moonlight. Well, Moonlight, that's a direct Fairy move, and then we have Moonblast. That's a direct Fairy moon, and Lunala's the Moon box art moon Pokemon of moonness. So what if it's just like a super crazy Moonblast, because that's where Fairy stuff comes from. Makes a lot of sense. Also, Clefairy. Clefairy is a Pokemon that's like of the moon and has heavy interactions with the Moonstone. So Fairy typing first on Lunala, and this could mean might be like Fairy Dark, because that's kind of crazy, right? Well, Dark doesn't make a lot of sense now because we already talked about Psychic so much. And we look at some other aspects, the Moonstone does interact with Psychic Pokemon as well. That Musharna. Musharna evolves from Munna with the Moonstone, and also we have Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff is a Fairy typing that is evolved through Moonstone as well. So it's showing a lot of like the moon representing both Psychic because of space and Fairy because of pretty moonlight stuff going on. Not really sure. And then the plot thickens. What about Cresselia? Because we have the moon Pokemon that's being represented as the Hard Moon Legendary, but Cresselia has always been there as the lunar Pokemon. So that's a very strong thing as well. Now, it's not a Fairy typing, it's just a pure Psychic lunar Pokemon, so more moon, more Psychic, and that might be a good thing when we think about it, because a Psychic Dark Pokemon would be very stale in my opinion, especially for Lunala. Now, Dark Fairy, while being one of the coolest things, or Psychic Fairy or Psychic Dark, it could be any one of those three, but if we remove Dark from the equation, things get a lot more interesting. We just had Hoopa Unbound introduced as one of the last Pokemon in the X and Y decks, and that's a Psychic Dark Pokemon, so we're getting a legendary Pokemon with the same typing so soon, even though it was a really cool typing and unique when it came out. Now just kind of like, well, it wouldn't be as special anymore, which could cause some problems. Also, when we think about it, traditionally, whenever there's a legendary duo and one has an objective typing advantage over the other, it's not as exciting. Now, before Primals, back in the 3rd generation, when we had Groudon Kyogre, it was really hard being a Groudon fan because Kyogre just destroys you non-stop. That you just get wrecked by a water type move and GG, it's over. Same with Xerneas and Yveltal, you know, Xerneas, it doesn't matter. Even when we're looking at Xerneas versus something like Zygarde, Zygarde with its Aura Break still can't survive a Xerneas attack, and Dark is going to lose to Moonblast, and Xerneas is Fairy typing. However, we see some of the best legendaries when they don't immediately beat each other. Like, that was one of the curious things about Lugia and Ho-Oh. Lugia, even though it controls the sea, it lives in the sea, it seems like some kind of like water dragon bird thing, it's going to be a Psychic typing. And because of that, people haven't been able to say, oh, Lugia is 100% always going to be better than Ho-Oh because, oh, you just use like Hydro Pump and then Ho-Oh dies immediately no matter what. So having this being versus Fire and Psychic means that there's a lot more fun about it, that people can feel good about choosing either, even though Lugia is the best legendary of the two. Now, we can look at just the other speculation about this. If it is Fairy, that's going to be a disadvantage for Lunala just a bit because its main stab is going to be at least resisted by Solgaleo, but a resist is going to be not as impactful as just a straight up super effective hit. Okay, so Solgaleo won't be able to one-shot Lunala, and Lunala won't be able to one-shot Solgaleo. If Lunala was like a Fairy Dark or a Psychic Dark typing, it would be over way too fast. And even if it was like, if it had Dark, well then that means Solgaleo's other stab isn't going to do anything either, because, okay, Psychic gets immune, there's no point there, and I don't think that would actually play into the lore as nice. And when you think about it, the sun kind of trumps the moon. That whenever there's darkness, you know, darkness will be illuminated. That's why the Fairy typing is stronger than the Dark typing, and the Dark doesn't do anything back to Fairy. It's not like a stalemate kind of battle, that the light will prevail kind of idea, and that's a theme that goes through Pokemon. So seeing that, maybe the moon, or maybe the sun is supposed to have a little bit of advantage against the moon, and it's not going to be just like a total wipe either way. And I guess when you think about it, the moon is just reflected sunlight, so could represent something that way. Another thing to think about is, what about the temple? So we've already talked about the typing speculation. I'm going to say Fairy Psychic and Fire Psychic for those two, but the temple also makes it really interesting for the interactions between these guys, and it's again something else that stumped me. Why are the symbols reversed? If we look at Solgaleo, moon is on the left, sun is on the right. We look at Lunala, sun is on the left, moon is on the right. Why must you be so confusing? Now, one thing that we can assume about the Lunala is that when we look at Solgaleo's, there's going to be a picture of the sun that he's standing on, so it's a sun-based platform, which means that we can assume that Lunala has a moon-based platform, and maybe this just kind of dictates their rule, that when it's sunny out, when it's daytime, that's when Solgaleo is able to just kind of keep everything in check with its immense legendary psychic powers. And then we have it to where Lunala does the same at night with its crazy moonlight fairy and psychic type powers. Now, one really interesting comment that I saw actually implied that maybe they're on some kind of pedestal. That's a very large temple, maybe on top of a volcano, maybe on top of a mountain, and that's like probably has some kind of very high cultural significance, and it rotates through their psychic powers, that they use their psychic powers to kind of manipulate this clock, and maybe this clock even represents the entirety of the world for like the night and day cycles. Then when you think about it, all right, they can kind of just rotate that and then keep everything in check, and if the designs are similar, then that means as it rotates, it will eventually make it to where, all right, the sun will shift to being on the left side and the moon will shift to being on the right side when it's light and dark out, because we can clearly see that it's nighttime when Lunala is out and it's daytime when Solgaleo is out. So that might have something to do with it. I don't really know what else. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's really cool when we can actually see the legendaries coexist in their own way, kind of like Lugia and Ho-Oh, and not as much like Xerneas and Yveltal. I'm wondering what this does for the game, though. Like, will choosing the game have any extreme significance? Maybe that's just what the evil team goes after. Evil team's like, we want the power of the night, and then they go and steal Lunala, and then it's perpetually day, and then vice versa, or something like that, until you get everything restored. Maybe you can catch both legendaries in the game if it's like that. Because either it's some kind of really weird parallel universe thing to where we're living in a world where Lunala's temple is a big key factor or something. Maybe they're opposite of each other. That could also make another sense. So maybe it's not like a giant platform temple that's spinning around, but at least they're opposite of each other, and that's kind of like how they battle out. Maybe that they just battle eternally, you know? Solgaleo gets tired, and that's why it becomes night, and then Lunala gets tired as Solgaleo rests, and that's why it becomes day. And there's a lot of really weird things that this can turn into. But I wanted to add that speculation on the end of this video. And then there is one last thing to talk about, even with all of this. What about the strange souvenir? That we were just given this thing, and then it's like, oh, by the way, it's a protector from a faraway land that's not any of the known Pokemon regions that confirm the 7th gen effectively from X and Y. Well, what does it have to do with these two Pokemon? I don't see anything that has to do with these two Pokemon. It just represents something about Hawaii, and maybe it's just some kind of lore protector of a Pokemon that doesn't even exist, kind of like how a lot of just mythological stuff is in our world. Either way, it's a tiki-looking thing. There's a lot of tikis from what we see in the trailer, and it has some resemblance. Maybe it's going to more hint at the 3rd legendary, so whatever spin-off other super crazy Pokemon we haven't even seen. It's the Zygarde of the region. Might mean something, might get buried, might get just some kind of anime feature and then never spoken of again. We don't know. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I don't think I have to make another video on the legendaries because I covered everything left. Please don't discover anything until like next month's Korokoro or even until the game comes out. I don't want to talk about these guys anymore. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you for watching.